Berlin, March 1944, 07:15 hours. He was, by all accounts, one of Germany's finest, a test pilot who had dedicated his life to the skies. His hands knew the controls of a Messerschmitt like his own heartbeat. He'd even mastered the radical Me-262 jet, the machine that was supposed to be Germany's technological advantage. But on this day, late in the conflict, he was a spectator, climbing into the cockpit of the opposing side. This was the North American P-51 Mustang, the silver icon of air superiority, the very aircraft that had systematically challenged the dominance of his air force. His mission was straightforward: fly, test, and evaluate the machine that had outperformed his colleagues and was now limiting the strategic options of his country. But his personal choice was far more complex, caught between loyalty to his nation and his professional integrity as an aviator. This is the account of that choice, a story that for decades remained a whisper in the halls of aviation history. It's the legend of a man caught between two worlds, a pilot known as Hans Werner Lurcher. To really grasp the weight on this pilot's shoulders, you must understand the sky he operated in. The early years of the Second World War in Europe were defined by the roar of the Luftwaffe, the Messerschmitt Bf-109, the Focke-Wulf 190. These were the instruments of a new form of aerial confrontation, and the pilots flying them were highly skilled. For a time, their air superiority seemed absolute. So when the American 8th Air Force began its daylight bombing campaign, it did so with a bold, almost overconfident concept. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, equipped with multiple machine guns, was promoted as a self-defending aerial platform. The theory was simple: fly in tight combat box formations, create overlapping fields of fire, and build a protective barrier that no enemy fighter could penetrate. For a brief time, on short-range missions near the coast, it achieved its goal. But as the targets moved deeper into Germany, the strategic theory encountered a critical limitation. The problem was pure logistics: fuel versus distance. American escort fighters, like the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning, simply lacked the necessary range. They could guard the bombers over the channel, but eventually, their fuel reserves forced them to turn back. This left the bombers to continue the mission unsupported. Bomber crews had a term for that moment: the departure of the little friends. From that point onward, they were isolated, flying straight into a zone of high risk, and the enemy fighters were always waiting. Luftwaffe fighter wings had perfected their response tactics. They'd gather just beyond the escort's range, and the moment the little friends turned for home, the German fighters would engage the bombers with impressive intensity. They attacked in waves, head-on, cannons operational. They dived from above at incredible velocities. They even used air-to-air rockets, fired from outside the range of the bombers' defenses. The results were highly detrimental. The summer and fall of 1943 saw a period of significant losses. The raid on the Schweinfurt ball-bearing plants on October 14th, a day that became known as Black Thursday, was the strategic low point. Of 291 B-17s dispatched, 60 were shot down. Over 600 American airmen were lost in a single day. The loss rate reached a crippling 26%. The Allied command faced a difficult reality. The daylight bombing campaign was faltering. The cost in personnel and aircraft was simply too high. They had to impose a temporary pause on deep raids without escort. It appeared the Luftwaffe still maintained control of the skies over Germany. They had demonstrated the B-17 was not an invulnerable fortress. It was a vulnerable vessel flying over a strategic challenge. A new technological solution was urgently needed. Across the Atlantic, a solution was already emerging. Back in 1940, the British Royal Air Force was in need of fighters. They asked North American Aviation, an American company, to build them some P-40 Warhawks. But NAA's lead designer, Dutch Kindleberger, had a superior idea. Instead of building another's aging design, he promised he could deliver a brand-new, better fighter in record time. The British agreed, and just 102 days later, the prototype rolled out. This was the genesis of the Mustang. The initial versions showed great promise. They were fast and maneuverable at low to medium altitudes. But they had a critical limitation: the American Allison engine. It was reliable, but its single-stage supercharger meant its performance diminished significantly above 15,000 feet. It became sluggish, right where the most critical air-to-air engagements were happening. It was a good plane, but not a revolutionary one. The decisive modification that turned it into a legend was a stroke of Anglo-American engineering ingenuity. A Rolls-Royce test pilot flew an early Mustang and was impressed by the airframe but recognized the engine was holding it back. He made a fateful suggestion. Why not pair this excellent American airframe with Britain's best engine, the Rolls-Royce Merlin? The Merlin, which powered the iconic Spitfire, featured a revolutionary two-stage supercharger that allowed it to perform optimally at high altitudes. The experiment was a stunning success. The Mustang airframe plus the Merlin engine was a revelation. The plane's top speed increased to well over 400 miles per hour at high altitude. Suddenly, the U.S. had a fighter that was arguably the best in the world. Packard Motor Car Company began building Merlins in the U.S., and the new P-51 B and C models started arriving in Europe in late 1943. They also came with another crucial feature: a substantial internal fuel capacity, plus external drop tanks. With these, the P-51 could fly from England to Berlin, engage in aerial combat, and return. The escort problem had been resolved. For Luftwaffe pilots, the first encounters were a complete surprise. They were accustomed to waiting for the little friends to leave before targeting the bombers. Now, the situation was different. They would climb to intercept bombers deep inside Germany, expecting a routine mission, and instead be confronted by groups of these deadly new fighters. The P-51 could outclimb, outrun, and outdive Germany's best fighters at high altitude. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns were highly effective, and due to America's industrial capability, they were available in massive numbers. The balance of air power began to shift, at first slowly, then with crushing momentum. By early 1944, the situation was irreversible. Bomber losses dropped sharply. The Luftwaffe was experiencing significant depletion of its most experienced pilots day after day. The psychological effect was equally profound. Seeing Mustangs operate freely over the Reich was a signal that Germany was losing control of its own airspace. The final acknowledgement came from the top. When the head of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring, saw the silver gleam of P-51s over Berlin, he understood the gravity of the situation. He famously told a colleague, "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the game was over." Now, this is where the story transitions from documented history into the realm of wartime narrative. Amidst the Luftwaffe's decline, a remarkable and debated story began to circulate: the account of Hans Werner Lurcher. There are no official records confirming every detail of his story, and his name is not easily found in German or Allied archives. He may have been one man, or his story might be a composite of the experiences of many. But the narrative itself is compelling. As the story is told, Lurcher wasn't just any pilot. He was one of Germany's most respected test pilots, a professional who prioritized the truth revealed in the air above all else. The story suggests that by late 1944, the conflict was taking a heavy personal toll on him. He witnessed undertrained pilots being sent up to face a superior force against the endless waves of P-51s. He saw German leadership disconnected from reality, demanding impossible outcomes while ignoring the grim truth. The story continues that on December 14, 1944, Lurcher was on a test flight when his engine suffered a failure. However, the narrative insists this was no accident, that Vanilla had deliberately disabled his own aircraft. He had concluded he could no longer participate in a conflict he knew was strategically lost. So, he nursed his crippled plane across the front lines and successfully executed a forced landing in American-held territory. Initially, he was simply another POW, but during interrogations, his profound knowledge of German aviation became evident. This garnered the attention of Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson, a key figure in American air technical intelligence and an experienced test pilot himself. In Lurcher, Watson saw a vast opportunity, a direct insight into the perspective of the enemy's top experts. Watson proposed something completely unprecedented, an idea that supposedly sparked a 23-day debate at the Pentagon. The concept? Allow the German to fly. According to the narrative, the proposal to Hans Lurcher was as simple as it was audacious. Fly American fighters and provide an honest, technical evaluation. The risks were immense. No one had ever placed an enemy POW in the cockpit of their most advanced fighter during an active conflict. What if he attempted to escape? What if he was an intelligence operative? But the potential reward was equally significant. The Americans had data, but they lacked the enemy's perspective. How did the P-51 feel to a German pilot? What were its vulnerabilities from their point of view? What aspects of its performance did they respect? The story suggests that approval came, but with stringent rules. Lurcher's participation had to be voluntary, and he would not fly any combat missions. For Lurcher, it was a profound ethical dilemma. On one hand, it felt like betrayal. His countrymen were still risking their lives. But on the other, it was the ultimate professional challenge. A chance to fly the plane that had overcome his comrades and understand why. His professional integrity as a test pilot compelled him. He accepted. The day he walked up to the P-51 must have been intense. This was the aircraft that symbolized the Luftwaffe's loss of air superiority. Climbing into the cockpit, he would have immediately registered the difference. German cockpits were functional but confined. The Mustang's cockpit was a model of ergonomic design. The bubble canopy offered a near 360-degree view, a massive advantage over the heavily framed canopy of a Bf-109. With a puff of smoke, the Merlin engine roared to life, a sound that, until now, had only signaled engagement. He pushed the throttle forward, and the Mustang accelerated with powerful surge. As he lifted off, he began his methodical evaluation. He took it to high altitude, where air superiority was won and lost. This is where the Merlin-powered P-51 truly excelled, climbing with astonishing energy. In his mind, he was constantly comparing it to his own aircraft. Certainly, a Bf-109 might be able to outturn a Mustang in a low-altitude dogfight, but the P-51 wasn't designed for that maneuver. It was an energy fighter. A Mustang pilot, who was losing a turn fight, could simply break away, climb at a rate the German could not possibly match, and then dive back in for another attack from a position of advantage. His report, as the story recounts, was brutally objective. He praised the American engineering and, crucially, the quality of manufacturing. By late 1944, German planes were being constructed with substitute materials and under extreme pressure. The American planes, in contrast, were perfectly assembled. It wasn't just a superior design, it was a superiorly built machine. He explained that American pilots were endurance runners in a conflict where German pilots had only been trained to be sprinters. The P-51 had altered the entire strategic pace. And this is where the narrative presents its most complex challenge. Lurcher's American handlers now requested something more than just technical reports. They wanted him to draft a document detailing the P-51's superiority, sign it, and have it dropped by the thousands over Luftwaffe airfields. The objective was simple: to damage the morale of the German fighter pilots. This was a major difference. Flying the plane was a professional exercise. This was a form of psychological operation. It meant actively participating in the mental demoralization of his own people. The story speaks of his intense inner conflict. He had broken ties with the regime, but he had not abandoned his countrymen, the pilots he'd flown with. To sign that document would be to tell them their courage was futile, their sacrifice meaningless. But on the other hand, what the Americans wanted him to write was the undeniable truth. The P-51 was superior. The conflict was strategically lost. Continuing the engagement would only lead to further loss of life and resources. Perhaps, by signing, he could help mitigate the overall consequences by contributing to a faster conclusion of the war. The story suggests that Hans Lurcher made his decision. He agreed to write the report, but he would do it on his terms. He refused to write simple propaganda. Instead, he composed a cold, professional, technical assessment, just like his others. He laid out the facts: the P-51's superior climb rate, the advantage of the bubble canopy, the strategic impossibility of a favorable outcome. He didn't write surrender. He wrote, in the dispassionate language of an engineer, why there was no reasonable hope for success. He signed the document, knowing it would sever the final link connecting him to the life he had known. In the narrative, he chose his professional integrity over his national loyalty. After Germany's capitulation in May 1945, Lurcher was a man without a secure home. Returning to Germany, where he would surely be branded a traitor, was not a viable option. But his expertise remained incredibly valuable to the United States as the Cold War began. His story, as a legend, serves as a powerful metaphor for what followed. While there is no record of Lurcher being the first, his alleged recruitment mirrors the spirit of the real-life Operation Paperclip. This top-secret program brought hundreds of German scientists and engineers to America to utilize their knowledge for the U.S. military and keep it out of Soviet hands. The final chapter of the Lurcher legend grants him a fresh start. He is offered a civilian contract to continue his work as a test pilot for the U.S. Air Force, helping to shape the next generation of American aircraft. His supposed relationship with Harold Watson endured, a quiet symbol of how a shared professional respect could transcend the deep divisions of war. The story concludes that in 1950, Lurcher finally returned to a new, democratic West Germany, where he helped revitalize the civilian aviation sector. His story was kept confidential for decades, partly because it involved wartime intelligence, but perhaps also because it challenged the simplistic narratives of war. He wasn't a simple traitor. According to this powerful account, he was a professional who, facing an impossible choice, chose what he perceived as a higher allegiance to objective truth and human consideration. The history of the P-51 Mustang is a testament to innovation and industrial capacity. It was the aircraft that fundamentally altered the balance of power for the Luftwaffe and helped bring about the end of the conflict in Europe. Its legacy is etched in undeniable facts. Woven into that history is the quieter, more personal, and likely allegorical tale of Lurcher. Whether a single individual by that name truly existed, or if his story is a legend born from the dilemmas of many, It resonates because it speaks to a powerful truth about the complex intersection of patriotism, professionalism, and moral integrity. His alleged journey compels us to look beyond easy labels like hero and traitor. It suggests that genuine integrity can sometimes mean making choices that appear to be the ultimate abandonment of one's national code. The story of the German pilot in the Mustang's cockpit is a powerful reminder that the most profound decisions are rarely between right and wrong, but between two conflicting professional and human duties. If you found this exploration of aviation history and its complex human stories compelling, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. We have many more stories to tell, from the celebrated aces to the unsung legends of the sky. Thanks for watching. In the late summer of 1944, the Allied war effort faced significant challenges. After taking the beaches of Normandy and advancing across France, the momentum was at risk of a major slowdown. The forward movement had been remarkable, but now the entire operation was in serious jeopardy. This was not due to a failure in strategy or a large-scale counteroffensive from the German side. The core issue was simply a massive shortage of fuel and essential supplies. General George S. Patton, known for his relentless drive, found his tank divisions running on empty. The push toward Germany risked a critical stop, which would have offered the adversary valuable time to reorganize and fortify. The solution emerged not from a new weapon or a brilliant military tactic, but from the essential demanding world of logistics. It came in the form of a non-stop, round-the-clock supply route, manned by soldiers who, in a painful historical irony, were largely confined to support roles and not permitted to serve in the combat units they were urgently being asked to assist. This is the documented history of the Red Ball Express and how thousands of African-American service members, primarily utilizing 2.5-ton cargo trucks, made a decisive contribution to the Allied victory in the Second World War, while simultaneously delivering a strong challenge to the systemic prejudice they encountered every day. To fully grasp the urgent necessity of the Red Ball Express, it's vital to understand the complex logistical dilemma facing the Allies in August 1944. Their initial success had inadvertently become a problem. The D-Day landings in June had been a hard-fought achievement. For several weeks, the Allied forces were engaged in intense close-quarters combat in Normandy. Initial military plans projected a gradual, measured advance, estimating a 3-month period just to reach the Seine River. However, Operation Cobra, launched on July 25th, saw the U.S. First Army breach the German lines, allowing Patton's Third Army to advance rapidly. The movement was exceptionally swift, a complete reversal of a defensive strategy. Patton's armored units moved at high speed across France, frequently covering long distances daily, exceeding even the most hopeful projections. The German forces were in a rapid and disorganized withdrawal. It was a moment of military triumph, with the end of the conflict seemingly in sight. Yet, this remarkable success generated a corresponding crippling supply challenge. The advancing armies were moving faster than their support network. A modern fighting force consumes a massive amount of material. A single infantry division required approximately 750 tons of supplies daily during a sustained offensive. An armored division needed about 350 tons of gasoline for its fuel requirements alone. With 28 Allied divisions on the move, the necessary volume of supplies was immense. This shortage was not a mere inconvenience. It represented an existential threat to the entire operation. Tanks without power were simply static metal structures. Artillery without shells was rendered ineffective. Further complicating the problem was the Allied aerial campaign. Prior to the invasion, Allied air forces had systematically disrupted the French railway infrastructure to prevent German reinforcement. This successful isolation of the battle zone now meant the Allies could not rely on trains to support their own rapid movement. Furthermore, key large ports like Cherbourg were either heavily damaged or still under German control, rendering them temporarily unusable for mass unloading. Consequently, the Allied forces were predominantly being resupplied from the temporary beachheads used for the initial invasion. As General Eisenhower noted, every mile gained intensified the difficulty, as the transport vehicles had to travel increasingly long distances back to the beaches for resupply and then return to the front. By late August, the logistics issue reached a crisis point. Patton's Third Army was halted near the Meuse River, many hundreds of miles from the supply hubs in Normandy. The renowned armored units were literally immobile due to lack of fuel. Patton expressed his deep frustration, stating that his primary obstacle was not the enemy, but the failure of his own supply chain. This unexpected pause provided the German command a crucial opportunity to recover, regroup, and establish defensive positions. The optimal window for a swift conclusion to the war was rapidly closing. The Allied leadership was confronted with a severe logistical crisis that posed a threat to turn their military gains into a strategic setback. A logistical solution was urgently required. This necessary logistical solution would be implemented by service members engaged in two simultaneous struggles: the military conflict against aggressive forces in Europe and the profound fight against racial discrimination within their own armed forces. It is essential to understand the heavily segregated structure of the U.S. Army during World War II to appreciate the story of the Red Ball Express. In 1944, the military reflected the Jim Crow societal norms of the time. Over 1 million African Americans served, but under a system of strict and demeaning separation. From enlistment onward, they were assigned to separate formations, lodged in separate quarters, and often directed towards segregated medical facilities. A deeply rooted prejudiced belief among some high-ranking officers suggested that African American soldiers lacked the necessary qualities for combat roles. As a result, the vast majority were systematically excluded from frontline infantry and armored divisions. Instead, they were funneled into quartermaster corps and other support roles, often referred to as essential service jobs. They served as cooks, engineers, and stevedores responsible for unloading cargo ships. This institutional policy resulted in the underutilization of immense talent and a significant blow to the morale of these troops. The few African American officers that were commissioned were typically prohibited from commanding white troops. This situation created a significant moral challenge. These men were risking their lives to uphold ideals of freedom and democracy. Yet those very ideals were denied to them both in their home country and within the military organization they served. This struggle for victory over oppression abroad and victory over inequality at home became known as the Double V campaign. For many of these soldiers, their service transcended mere patriotism. It was a critical opportunity to demonstrate their full capability, skill, and commitment, with the hope that their sacrifices would finally establish their right to full and equal citizenship. It was from this pool of often overlooked and underestimated personnel, largely drawn from the Quartermaster Corps, that the logistical operators of the Allied supply network would emerge. These were individuals who had volunteered for the conflict, only to be told they were limited in their roles. They were professionals, mechanics, drivers, and industrial workers from various states, and in a moment of unprecedented logistical need, the military turned to the very soldiers it had marginalized to execute one of the most vital tasks of the entire war. Section 3. Forging a crucial supply route, the unconventional plan. With Patton's forces stalled and the entire offensive facing potential collapse, the Allied senior command initiated a hurried response. Over an intense 36-hour period, a plan was developed from sheer necessity. The core concept was direct and enormous in scale. If the established rail network is non-functional, a non-stop, one-way trucking superhighway must be immediately created. This initiative became the Red Ball Express. The name was adopted from a historical railroad term where time-sensitive freight was designated with a red ball symbol to indicate highest priority transport. The name was perfectly suited, as speed was the paramount requirement. The plan was a bold logistical undertaking. A loop of French roads was officially designated and completely closed off to non-military traffic. One designated route was for fully loaded trucks moving east toward the combat zones, and a separate parallel route was for the empty trucks returning west. To maintain continuous flow, military police were stationed at every intersection and through every community with a clear directive: expedite the movement of the Red Ball trucks. Stopping was highly discouraged. The route was clearly marked with simple signs featuring a red ball, guiding the drivers along the essential supply line they were pioneering. The scale of the operation was enormous. It officially commenced on August 25, 1944. At its operational zenith, the Red Ball Express involved nearly 6,000 trucks simultaneously on the road. To provide the necessary drivers, the Army mobilized personnel from all available sources, but the substantial majority, approximately 75% of the 23,000 soldiers involved, were African American. Many had no formal commercial driving certification. They were clerks, cooks, and mechanics thrust into the role due to the critical demand. Most were young, and many had limited experience with heavy goods, transport vehicles. They received urgent instruction in operating the machine that would become their central focus, the GMC CCKW 2.5-ton cargo truck, universally known as the Deuce and a Half. This vehicle was the essential workhorse of the conflict. It was robust, dependable, and capable of transporting far greater loads than its official 2.5-ton capacity. However, it was a physically demanding machine to operate. The cabins were unheated, the suspension system was rigid, and the noise level was extremely high. Despite the nominal 2.5-ton capacity and the use of trailers, the Deuce and a Half trucks were constantly overloaded with an average operational payload of 5 tons. If we multiply the peak number of trucks involved, 6,000, by their effective operational load, 5 tons, we get a maximum theoretical haul of 20,000 tons per convoy. Despite these challenges, these were the vehicles that would carry the weight of the war effort on their steel chassis. The inaugural route extended over 300 miles from the coastal supply depots to a major forward distribution point near Paris. Official regulations mandated strict adherence to convoy protocol, maintaining a certain speed and a set distance between vehicles. However, as the demands of the conflict escalated, these rules often became flexible operational guidelines. The primary mission was both simple and intensely difficult: ensure the delivery of critical supplies to the front, regardless of the difficulty. The unconventional plan was now in active execution. Driving for the Red Ball Express was a grueling and demanding assignment. It was an unrelenting cycle of physical exhaustion, danger, and continuous operational pressure. The formal rules regarding speed and spacing were frequently ignored due to the urgency. This was not a routine transport operation. It was a chaotic, high-speed, non-stop effort against the ticking clock of the war. The drivers themselves adopted a French phrase, tout de suite, immediately, as their unofficial code of operation. One driver perfectly summarized the operational philosophy. He instructed us to eat, sleep, and drive, but primarily drive. And drive they did, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in all weather conditions. A complete round trip could require 54 hours of nearly continuous driving time. To sustain this, most trucks operated with a two-person team. While one man vigorously controlled the large truck, his colleague attempted to gain brief moments of rest in the passenger seat, an almost impossible task given the constant jarring movement and loud engine noise. The level of fatigue became so extreme it often resulted in severe drowsiness and disorientation. One young driver recalled, "I operated the vehicle when my vision was severely limited, relying mostly on instinct. You simply learn to feel the road." Drivers resorted to various methods to remain vigilant, splashing water on their faces, singing loudly, anything to combat the overwhelming exhaustion. The road network itself presented a major obstacle. These were typical French country roads, not modern highways, and they were significantly degraded by the effects of the war. A large pothole could cause a catastrophic tire failure, and a weak road shoulder could send a fully loaded vehicle into a ditch. Night operations were particularly hazardous. To evade detection by remaining enemy aircraft, drivers were strictly ordered to use only blackout lights, minimal light sources no larger than a small coin. Operating an overloaded truck at high speeds on a pitch-dark, severely damaged road using only those limited lights was a feat of pure courage and exceptional driving skill. Naturally, the imperative to deliver the cargo often led drivers to risk briefly using full headlights, hoping that no enemy fighter was positioned overhead. The adversary also presented a real and constant threat. Although the German main forces were in retreat, small, isolated units of snipers and saboteurs were left behind in the operational area. Red Ball convoys were frequently subjected to ambush attacks. Trucks transporting ammunition were particularly valuable targets. The possibility of mines was an ever-present concern, and many drivers placed sandbags on the floor of their cabs as a precautionary measure, hoping to mitigate the force of an explosion. Even with Allied air superiority, lone German aircraft could transform a truck convoy into a long line of burning wreckage. The inherent danger of the work meant the distinction between a support role and frontline combat duty became practically non-existent. An impressed armored division commander reportedly commented that the African-American drivers delivered the fuel while under fire. "I certainly would not want their assignment. They possess the required grit." Furthermore, the vehicle fleet was continuously subject to mechanical stress. The trucks were routinely loaded far in excess of their official capacity and operated at sustained high speeds. Tire blowouts were a constant occurrence. Inoperable trucks were often quickly dismantled by other drivers, urgently needing spare parts to keep their own vehicles moving. The Red Ball mechanics became masters of rapid field repairs, performing remarkable work in makeshift outdoor repair stations to ensure the trucks returned to the road. Despite all the challenges, a powerful sense of solidarity and mutual respect was forged. These men, brought together by institutional bias and operational necessity, relied completely on each other for their survival. Yet, even in this high-pressure environment, the impact of racial prejudice remained a constant, bitter reality. While the combat troops at the front were critically dependent on the supplies and indifferent to the race of the delivery personnel, the drivers frequently faced harassment and discriminatory treatment from some white military police in the rear areas. They were hailed as vital contributors on the road, but treated as second-class citizens when they stopped. This was a continuous, painful reminder of the double V objective they were fighting to achieve. The impact of the Red Ball Express was both immediate and decisive. That immense flow of essential materials moving eastward successfully revitalized the stalled Allied advance. For 83 consecutive days, from August 25th to November 16th, 1944, the trucks maintained their relentless schedule. The recorded figures are truly impressive. At its operational peak, the Red Ball Express was successfully delivering an extraordinary 12,500 tons of supplies daily. Throughout its entire duration, the service transported over 412,000 tons of crucial materiel to the combat zones. This is equivalent to over 800 million pounds of ammunition, fuel, food rations, and medical provisions. This sustained influx of supplies enabled Patton's Third Army to resume its advance and maintain constant pressure on the German forces. As one tanker service member recalled, "If it were not for the Red Ball operation, we would have been unable to move." They were all African-American drivers, and they delivered under active combat conditions. We in our tanks would anxiously await their arrival. This extraordinary logistical achievement stood in stark contrast to the German military's supply capacity. Despite its historical reputation for rapid offensive warfare, blitzkrieg, the German military was still significantly reliant on animal transport and trains. The same Allied air campaign that created the initial Allied supply challenge had an even more debilitating effect on the German logistics. Their lack of a massive, flexible trucking system like the Red Ball meant they were unable to match the Allied supply rate. The constant deep sound of the Red Ball truck convoys, often audible for significant distances, even developed into a psychological advantage. For the German soldiers, it was the unmistakable sound of an unstoppable industrial power they simply could not overcome. The Red Ball Express definitively proved that in the context of modern military operations, logistics is not merely a part of the strategy. Logistics is a fundamental element of the strategy itself. Even the most brilliant commanders and the most courageous personnel are rendered ineffective without essential resources. General Patton, a leader known for his measured praise, was compelled to acknowledge the operation's importance, concluding that the 2.5-ton truck is our most vital operational asset. General Eisenhower's son, Colonel John S. D. Eisenhower, offered an even more direct assessment, stating that without the Red Ball truck drivers, the advance across France could not have been achieved. The Red Ball Express was always intended as a temporary, emergency solution. By mid-November 1944, a more permanent and sustainable logistical network was ready. Allied engineers had successfully achieved the restoration of French rail lines. Crucially, the major port facility at Antwerp in Belgium was finally secured and cleared of obstructions, opening a high-volume shipping route much closer to the front lines. With rail and maritime transport handling the core load, the massive truck convoys were no longer the sole essential lifeline. On November 16th, the Red Ball Express officially ceased active operation. Its personnel, physically exhausted but possessing a deep sense of accomplishment, returned to their regular assignments, their legendary 83-day critical mission successfully completed. The importance of those 83 days extended far beyond the immediate military theater. The long-term legacy of the Red Ball operation was profound. In military science, the Red Ball operation established that logistical capacity was the definitive element for sustained success in modern warfare. The American ability to rapidly organize a 6,000-vehicle supply network on an emergency basis was an unprecedented demonstration of industrial and organizational capability that significantly impressed the German High Command. It became a military legend and a critical case study in operational feasibility. But the most significant story, the one that initiated fundamental societal change in the United States, was centered on the personnel. The outstanding performance of the thousands of African-American service members who formed the backbone of the Express was a clear, undeniable refutation of the racist generalizations that had restricted their service. They were deemed timid, yet they drove through zones of potential hostile fire. They were deemed unskilled, Yet they mastered the operation of heavy transport vehicles under the most challenging conditions imaginable. They not only managed the task, they demonstrably excelled. This reality was clearly recognized by senior military leadership. General Eisenhower himself issued a formal message of gratitude, recognizing that without their dedication, the entire armies might have failed. Their proven competence, alongside the valor of other African American units later permitted to serve in combat roles, planted the seeds of institutional reform. It became increasingly difficult to rationally defend military segregation in the face of such clear evidence of professionalism and courage. Although it would take 4 more years, the exemplary contributions of the Red Ball Express personnel were a crucial factor that contributed to President Harry S. Truman's issuance of Executive Order 9981 in 1948, which formally mandated the desegregation of the U.S. Armed Forces. For the men who operated the trucks, their service became a source of immense and justified personal pride. They had accomplished the seemingly impossible and played a direct, critical role in securing the Allied victory. They successfully confronted 2 adversaries, the enemy forces on the road and the systemic prejudice that constantly surrounded them. However, the fight for equal rights at home was far from over. These military heroes returned to an America that continued to treat them as second-class citizens. They had helped deliver liberty to a foreign nation only to come home to segregated public services. This stark injustice provided a powerful impetus for the burgeoning civil rights movement. The veterans of the Red Ball Express, inspired by their wartime achievements, became engaged community leaders, continuing the fight for the Double V on American soil. The Red Ball Express was born from a sudden, dire necessity, but it developed into a true historical legend. It is a documented account of difficult roads, intense fatigue, and critical pressure. More fundamentally, it is the story of soldiers who were initially denied the honor of combat, but who embraced the essential, demanding work of logistics and successfully carried it to victory. They proved that a truck can be as decisive as any weapon in a conflict, and that the long road to military success and the path toward true equality is often established by sheer, unyielding determination and historical significance. The documented story of the Red Ball Express represents a crucial component of our history, providing a powerful reminder that heroes are found in every role, not exclusively in combat. If you found this historical account as compelling as we do, please remember to subscribe and share this video. And share your thoughts in the comments about what other lesser-known histories you believe are essential to be told.